I think we're ready to get started. So, first of all, thank you so much for being here. This is day 2 of New York City Jewelry Week. I know some of you have been here since the morning. I really appreciate you sticking through the programs with us all day. It's really cool. If this is your first program, welcome. My name is Bella Naiman. I'm one of the co-founders of New York City Jewelry Week. You can find the program for the entire week's festivities on our website at nycjewelryweek.com. Also check out our Instagram page. I'd like to thank the Museum of Arts and Design for being the host of Mad Talks. This is actually our last talk for the 2 days of Mad Talks. So it's our last talk, but this is actually one of the first talks that I planned when putting together this program for the year. Our theme this year is iconography, past, present, and future. And so last year, a colleague of mine alerted me to the publication of this book, and I was incredibly excited because Ruth Bader Ginsburg is an icon, no doubt. And often in the jewelry field, we talk about jewelry having the power to communicate. And when you may not sort of feel comfortable speaking out what you wear, and especially the jewelry that you wear, does that speaking out on your behalf. And so I think that, this book and Ruth Bader Ginsburg embodied just that. Not that she was afraid to use her voice, certainly not, but I love the fact that she also allowed her adornment to speak for her as well. So before I introduce the two panelists, I do want to mention that Sarah Bader, who is the author of the book, unfortunately is unable to be here today because she was unwell. Nothing serious, but she just wasn't able to be here because she's unwell. And so we do have the incredible Eleanor Carucci with us, as well as Sarah Neville. So if you will join us on stage and give them a big round of applause. So although Sarah is not here, I do want to read her bio because she is an incredible writer and an editor. So Sarah Bader has worked as an acquisitions editor for Princeton Architectural Press and is a senior editor for Phaidon. In addition to editing visual culture books, she has conceived and researched several quotation compilations, including Art is the Highest Form of Hope and Every Day a Word Surprises Me. She's also the founder of Quotenik, a growing library of verified quotations, and the author of the collection, The Book of Pet Love and Loss, Words of Comfort and Wisdom from Remarkable People. And then our guest today, Eleanor Carucci, is an award-winning fine art photographer whose work has been featured in solo and group exhibitions worldwide and the New York Times, the New Yorker, Time, W, Aperture, and Art News, amongst others. Carucci's photographs are also included in the prestigious museum collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum of Art, the Jewish Museum, and the Houston Museum of Fine Art, among others. And Sarah Neville is the former editor, developed a list of gift books and paper products for Clarkson Potter's list between 2017 and 2023. With a background in retail merchandising and a passion for product development and trend research, she collaborated on an array of projects, including Karen Azule's Flowers and Their Meanings, Erin Morgenstern's The Phantom Wise Tarot, and Kristen Griffith Vander Yacht's Flower Love. Other authors include Sean Hewitt and Luke Edward Hall, Malika Gareb, Ibram X, Kendi, Rachel Sim, Yoshi Yoshitani, and the estates of both Richard Scarry and Mary Oliver. Sarah is now pursuing a career in education, working toward her teaching certificate for middle grade math. It's been a long day. I'm getting tongue-tied. Thank you so much for being here. We're really honored. And thank you all. We will also, if you have questions, I will happily be here passing the mic around at the end of our conversation. So thank you so much and enjoy.
Thank you. I put you to the test with all those names, so sorry for that. So she was small in stature, Ruth Bader Ginsburg looms very large in the halls of modern American history. She was the second woman ever appointed to the Supreme Court. She was the co-founder of the ACLU's Women's Rights Project, and in her later years, she became a very trendy pop culture icon. Justice Ginsburg is part of the foundation upon which we stand today. She became famous for writing very forceful dissents when she disagreed with a Supreme Court ruling. And in her 34 years on the Supreme Court, she wrote 115 of them. Something that she said just before her passing, something that she said was that every time she writes a dissent, hope springs eternal. She really believed in the staying power of dissent and its mark on history in the hopes that future generations would be able to use her words. And that brings me to her dissent collar, which was actually a necklace from Banana Republic. It was a sort of glass-studded, bejeweled, beaded necklace with a thick velvet string. And it was almost reminiscent of a warrior's chest plate. It became an icon of her famous dissents. She wore it to read many of her dissents because it was black and grim. And back when she first started on the Supreme Court, along with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, they took to accessorizing what became the Supreme Court unofficial uniform, a very black and grim robe. They looked to figures of the past, barristers in England, magistrates in France, and they decided to wear frilly or lacy jabots, which are sort of these adornments worn around the collar. And over time, Ruth Bader Ginsburg used the collar as a way to express herself. Like Bella was saying, it was a form of communication before she even opened her mouth. When she wore her dissent collar, people knew she was not going to agree with the majority ruling. Or, when she wore a gift given to her by a law clerk, it was a representation of what her law clerks meant to her. So the choice to feminize this uniform was pretty radical. And no matter what she wore, it represented something. She wasn't super flashy with what she wore. There aren't a lot of high-end designers. Some of the pieces were custom made, but a lot of them were gifts, like the Banana Republic necklace. There was a necklace from Anthropology. And we kind of think that the way she wore her collars and the way she got them represent the mix of values that she represented, the mix of people. She took her career as a public servant very seriously, and these gifts represented something more than just beautiful adornments that could communicate something, but they represented the people that she served every single day. So Kismet brought this book proposal to my inbox. I had seen Eleanor's photographs in Time magazine just shortly after Justice Ginsburg's passing, and I knew there was a book there. And months later, the proposal landed in my inbox. When we met, along with Sarah Bader, who couldn't be with us today, there was an immediate connection when we spoke about Justice Ginsburg and her legacy. And I'm so proud of what we created. Today is actually publication day, so it's Kismet once again. Thank you. And so I'll just start off by asking about that Time assignment. You were contacted by someone at Time magazine. Tell us about that.
Yes, so I've been a photographer for many years and doing editorial assignments. And as my personal work that deals with people, I photograph my own life, trying to be universal in my themes, but it's very personal. I'm usually being hired to photograph people for intimate or sometimes sensitive kind of assignment. So this was a very different assignment. Catherine Pomeranez from Time called me and left a mysterious message, and I have an incredible assignment, but I'm not sure it's for you. And so I called her, and she told me, well, this is an incredible assignment. I'm going to tell you about it in a minute, but it's a still life photography. So I was kind of, okay. And then she told me what it is. It was a month after Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed. And it was, we were very emotional about this, especially me and my daughter. Already, we were sitting in the Rosh Hashanah dinner when we learned about her passing, and my daughter started crying. She cried all the way home from my aunt. So for us, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, like for many American people or people all over the world, was a superhero. So when she told me about the callers going to the Supreme Court, I was like, yes, of course, I'm a still life photographer. I photographed my own uterus after the hysterectomy, which is not so relevant. But for me, I was like, was my way to prove that I do still life. And I think it was the first assignment that I got because of who I am and not because of exactly how I photograph. Catherine wanted a woman, an artist, a mother, or maybe one or two of those things. And it was really her vision that made this work. And I was like, yeah, it's the kind of work that I do. And then we got into the conversation of how and what and all the details.
Yeah, I remember when we first met, speaking about how much of Justice Ginsburg, or how much of yourself you saw in her. She's a mother who really valued family, a Jewish woman. And so it's nice that Catherine wanted someone like you to photograph, because what came out of them was these stunning photographs. A lot of your work is very intimate, and you speak about it a little bit in the introduction to the book. But can you share about the intimate nature of this work? What it was like to see these pieces and to hold them? Did it feel just as intimate as photographing people? Was it different? What was it like?
So I didn't know how it will feel because I've never done anything like that, and I usually don't photograph famous people at all, just like regular people and their stories, just like me. So I just came to it with an open mind, knowing this is a different kind of work. But first of all, the whole situation was like so intense. So my husband assisted me that day. The poor thing has been assisting me for 30 years, on and off. And we both of us immigrants from Israel, we came to the Supreme Court. So just to begin with, we were like, and had all the equipment and the dog sniffing and all that.
Went through security and
yes.
the whole thing. In
Thinking,
2020, nonetheless.
No, 2020, we're all with the masks and everything. And we're American citizens, so, Institute of American, like, going through our visa and then green card and then citizenship, and now we're in the Supreme Court, we're like, and then we went to one of the chambers, everything is like so amazing, and we met with some of the people who worked with Justice Ginsburg, and then at some point they rolled her drawers, her set of drawers. And I had 6 minutes with the caller. So we were preparing the light. We were testing the light. We were there for a few hours. But then they pulled them out, and we put the gloves and the white gloves. And it was, again, I don't know what of it was everything I know about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and looking up even more all the pictures with her colors, or what was really there, But it was beautiful colors, each of them. So Tessa, the writer, was there as well. So I could hear in the background some of the stories. Most of them, all of them maybe, I didn't really know. I knew some of the colors, the famous South African one. And then, as I'm looking through the lens, I started seeing little details of some of the parts that are worn out, or the clasp that is rusty. And I was like, I am actually photographing something that Ruth Bader Ginsburg wore. It dawned on me. And I started zooming into those little details. hearing the stories in the background, it did feel at the end of the day as if I somehow managed to take a portrait of Justice Ginsburg.
It's really beautiful to see those tiny details. They come through really well in the book, thanks to our production team and design team. And you can see some of the clasps are rusty, and you think about how many years did she wear this, and where did it live before it got to her? You mentioned that you looked at pictures of her in collars before you went.
Right.
Were there any that like you recognized or you were excited to see, or did they all kind of just feel different in the moment?
Both. I mean, I recognize, like everyone, the South African collar. Yes, the one on our cover. And then when I looked up, I was like, oh, I remember this one. I remember this one. Looking at different colors, but I didn't know much about the stories behind them. Some have less, but I didn't know much, and we learned a lot that day. So some were more famous than others, and I didn't realize that there are so many. And I also, I didn't realize that some of them have writings in them, like the Stefello, the opera one, and that has her name. And with the ones with the writing, it's not Sacrifice, it's Family by her husband, the words by him, Marty. I started crying. And my husband yelled at me because he said, we have 6 minutes per color. I need to take a full frame, and we're setting up the lights and details.
No time for tears.
He's like, you can't stop with the crying now. So I had to get over myself and only let myself be emotional after.
Yeah. So what was that like? I know in the book you speak a little bit about that drive home. Did it hit you? And you also mentioned it felt like you sort of took a portrait of her. Speak more to that.
It was just such an incredible day, being there in the Supreme Court. It was the first day also of Amy Coney Barrett, so that was also like, everything was really dramatic for us, and seeing so much of personal object of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. At first we didn't talk much. We were just like, when we drove home from DC back home at the end of the day. And then I started to think, I really feel like I got a little peek into who she was.
And that's something that kernel is something that our writer, Sarah, took and ran with. She researched every collar and did what she could to find photos of Justice Ginsburg in 25 collars. I think you only photographed 20 initially for the piece.
Right, I photographed 20, and then we found 4 more to add. And it was difficult because they're in different places.
Right.
And now even the ones that were in the Supreme Court are spread between law clerks and friends and family.
And museums, too.
And museums, some were in museums before, and I photographed in the Philadelphia Jewish Museum and at a new Jewish Museum in Tel Aviv, and in different places, in Columbia Law School. So we tried to add some more to the collection, and also add a lot of the details, images that maybe a few were published with time, but not most of them.
Right. It was such a journey to see these pieces, and then to have Sarah bring us the stories behind them. She tracked down some artists who had custom-made pieces for Justice Ginsburg. There are 2 in particular that were wildly intricate, and Sarah was able to interview one of the women runs the Lace Guild of Brooklyn, I think.
Elena
Kennedy Lou, if I'm saying that right. And
Kim Lieberman.
Kim Lieberman, who's a South African artist, and she created one of the collars as well. And what we found was that for those that we knew the stories of, like who gifted her the collars, or like Kim and Elena made some of the collars. It was a little bit easier to kind of dig into the art of the piece. But in other cases, I pushed Sarah to find a way to tell more about Justice Ginsburg's life. So some of them represented the values that she stood for. For example, there's a rainbow collar that she wore around the time marriage equality was passed. And though she never explicitly said she was for marriage equality before the fact, it was a symbol. It communicated to the American people, to the world, that there's a value there that she shares. So I encourage Sarah to write about her, Justice Ginsburg's, influence on that decision and what she did speak publicly about. And so we kind of found our way into different facets of her legacy through these stories. It was like an investigative kind of journalistic piece. And I remember in our preparation for this, Sarah was going to speak a little bit about how this was a project unlike any she'd done before. She, as Bella had mentioned, she does a lot of quote compilations. She's very good at finding a quote for any scenario from a famous voice. And this one involved a lot more research. It was a departure for Sarah. It was a challenge. But she did such a good job of bringing these different flashes of Ginsburg's life to life in the book.
And we even thought at some point, because for me it was a very challenging assignment, photographing still life, and for Sarah it was challenging, and we're like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is still having an impact on women, and I could not get a little spiritual about it, that we are being pushed somehow by her legacy. And I'm sure for you too, like,
Yeah.
why did you, and Sarah was so passionate about this book, that we're like, we're gonna do this book together. Why did you feel that way, Sarah?
Oh,
I never asked you, so
I know. Oh gosh. Well, like I said, when I first saw your photographs, I was so moved. They came at such a difficult time, and her passing came at such a difficult time, that seeing these really stark and intimate images, again, because of my work as an editor, I felt connected. I felt like there's more to be told here. There's a book here. And part of why Justice Ginsburg meant so much is because of her values kind of reflected my own. And as a queer woman who had just started a family, I felt sort of protected by her. So when she passed, I just felt so connected. I knew that I wanted to use the power that I had as an editor to share her story. And I was so glad that we were able to connect
with it too,
and bring it to life. And people were so excited too. And I'm sure I wanted to ask Shu about when the piece came out, what the response was like for you. How did people respond to that story?
Unlike any assignment I've ever done, and I've really done a lot of big assignments, not to brag, but like cover stories to the New York Times Magazine, this was like nothing, because of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because of her legacy. I received, and Veronica Hauk is here, my gallerist. We received a lot of requests, not only for the print. If there is a book, there are a lot of questions to do exhibitions from lawyers, from collectors, from artists, from women, from feminists, from Jewish people, from non-Jewish people. And we were all just like, this is a lot. Like, people love those colors. And we also felt that there was something uniting and not so political about the beauty of them, the femininity of them, how they're not And we talked about it even in the beginning. I was expecting to go into the Supreme Court and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and see famous designers and diamonds and I don't know. And there were things that even my grandma, because my grandma did crochet back in Jerusalem, I was like, this is like something, the one in Anu is like something my grandma would have done. Banana Republic, anthropology, things that people bought for her in thrift stores. So it felt so accessible and so human and so beautiful that I remember we were just like shocked by the interest and in a very, people were really moved by them and felt connected and felt like this is something I could have had, or my grandma could have had, or my mother could have had.
Right.
And this is what Ruth Bader Ginsburg wore to represent something, to send messages to us, to everyone, not only to the people in the Supreme Court or in the high, just to everyone.
Right. Right. There's a. She has there's so many great stories in this book about why she wore certain collars when she did. Let's see. I think so. The research was something that was a challenge, but I remember you and Sarah talking about trying to track down a thrift store that they had sold someone a collar that ended up in the collection, and it was just tough to get those details because Justice Ginsburg was a very private person, and one of the things that Sarah Bader spoke to was that there were a lot of obstructions when it came to the research. She ran into a lot of walls looking for who was this collar from, which law clerk was it from, where did they buy it, when did they buy it, why did they gift it to her, why did they feel so connected to her, and even though she ran into these walls, the things that came through were kind of the purest parts of Justice Ginsburg. No matter what Sarah was looking for, she found hints of Ginsburg's work ethic, her tenacity, her fierce devotion to her family. She really took to nurturing her law clerks. She found writing to be the most powerful way to express oneself. And even Sarah, as I mentioned, it was a little bit of a departure for her. And when she had these moments of doubt, she looked to this one particular quote that's featured in the book that Ginsburg said to her law clerks, when writing a dissent, an opinion of any kind, get rid of the fluff, make it as clear as possible, get it right and keep it tight. And that was Sarah's guiding light as she continued to write this book was, don't worry about getting all the details of what thrift store this came from and who sold it to the law clerk's second cousin who gave it to the law clerk to get, it became clear as she researched what Ginsburg's purest values were. And it's so interesting that a piece of jewelry and this collection of jewelry, whether you consider a jabot or a neck piece a piece of jewelry, they were adornments of some kind. This collection of adornments really emphasized this woman's values and the values that she left for us, the legacy that she left for us. Let's see. Was there a particular piece of jewelry or collar or even a moment that we learned about in the research process that struck you in particular?
I think it was the family collar, as we call it in the book, and of course relating to my own work and the themes of my work, because I was struck when I saw it, but I didn't know anything about it. It's the one that says it's not sacrifice, it's family, and it's her law clerk's gift to her. They commissioned it from LaFleur. And so I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know whose words was it. So then we realized it was Marty's words. And when they commissioned it, that each of the sections represent, I mean, there's so much in every little detail of this collar. Each represent a family member, Marty, Justice Ginsburg, and their two children.
To give a little visual, it's sort of this layered collar that there's like a small polka dotted fabric that is evocative of a man's tie, represents Marty, her husband. There's like a jacquard, pretty creamy fabric that represents her, and then there are two separate pieces of fabric that represent her two children, and it was woven together and then embroidered with words of her husband that say, it comes from a moment when they were moving from New York to Washington, D.C., and Marty had this successful career as a lawyer in his own right, and he decided to give up his career to let Ruth pursue hers because he knew what a phenomenal woman she was. And someone asked him, why are you making this sacrifice? What makes you want to make this move? And he said, it's not sacrifice, it's family. And so those words embroidered on this layered piece that she wore, and there was a matching scrunchie, which is fabulous. So I just want to give a little background. This is part of why you connected with it. So.
Right. And then later I read that he said it about both of them, that he meant in this specific event it was him, but that they both sacrifice a lot for the family, but it's not sacrifice, it's family. And so I felt, oh my God, you see something and you're immediately moved, but then you learn, and also how much work got into this specific one, as we learned about the 300 hours of Elena McNagey, like 300 hours to make the lace piece for her 25th anniversary. And some of them were bought with intention, some of them were made with intention. Mm-hmm. So this was another thing to learn.
I think that collar's my favorite too, just because of how intentionally symbolic it is, and the scrunchie. But another one that was interesting to learn about through editing this book was the famous South African collar, the white beaded one there was a piece of art on the cover of the New Yorker that week that she passed. That was a version of the collar, but with the symbol, the woman's symbol. And it's interesting because we learned that Justice Ginsburg was really connected to South Africa. She had visited there and valued some of their politics. And so the fact that this came from South Africa, and then Kim Lieberman, an artist from South Africa, made her a collar. All of these stories started to come full circle. And it was so cool to see that it started with a photograph, this intimate 6-minute, probably panicked, like, don't cry, don't let them see you sweat kind of moment, to Sarah having to dig for answers. And they all sort of wove together to create this pretty patchwork that is a portrait in and of itself of Justice Ginsburg.
And for some, I know that we said we will never know the answer. We can guess. There is the spiky collar that she wore for Justice Kavanaugh's
Kavanaugh's confirmation day.
Right. We don't know why she wore it, but we're like, we know why she wore it. We can feel her. So I think some of it was also like some of the mystery, like. We know some things, but some things like, what did she mean? And we can only come up with theories, right. But we will never know.
And another one that was kind of poignant is she got a beaded collar similar to the famous South African one, but it was like champagne-colored beads she got from Etsy.
Oh, yeah.
And she wore it on President Trump's inauguration day, and it ended up it was such a cold day. She was all bundled up, and she wore the collar. I think it was sort of over a scarf or a little bit tangled in with her outerwear. And it ended up falling apart, and they had to restring it. And that struck me as, it just was a powerful visual moment where, we knew what she stood for, and she was never going to come out and speak to her politics so boldly. But the fact that she wore something that somehow communicated something to the public without even her intent, it just was wild to see, to
Right.
get that story.
Especially for a woman of words.
Right.
She's such a woman of words and writing, and to have the symbol saying something that can be open for interpretation was another layer of her personality.
Right. Yeah, she really valued writing. She actually learned under the tutelage of Vladimir Nabokov, and she really valued what she learned under him as a writer. She passed it on to her law clerks and really mentored them, and dedicated a lot of time to literally, she would write her dissents or a majority opinion. If she was writing the majority opinion, she would cut the sentences into shreds, rearrange them, talk to her students about what each word meant, and to strip out the fluff and to make sure it really packed a punch. And she did that with every aspect of her tenure. She was a woman of powerful words, but they weren't too frilly, or it wasn't too excessive. And the collars were kind of the same way. Despite some of them having intricate shell work or beading, embroidery, there was something so simple about the fact that so many of them were gifts. So many of them just represented how close she was to the people that she worked for her, she loved her, the people who looked up to her. She officiated so many weddings. We talked about how did she have the time to do it all?
Hundreds. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as a photographer, I think I was already connected to her because of the impact she had on our lives and human rights and people's rights, fathers and mothers, and equality. But suddenly I was like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg also thought about the importance of visuals. And I think this was for me a way to, of course, I will photograph this as a photographer because this is the part I can relate to the most.
Yeah. One sort of thing that came up that we found interesting about this process was that it was a departure for all three of us, for Sarah as a researcher, for you as a photographer, and even for me as an editor. I mean, I worked on tarot decks and books about unicorns. So to be able to work with such talented people who really had already made an impact on culture about someone who had made such an impact on history, we were just so inspired by her and how simple visual communication really meant a lot.
Is there anything we need to cover
I know.
that we talked about?
I'm
in our
trying to see
research?
if there's anything else. Yeah, the intimacy of it all felt really moving, and I think just to circle back to why we all were working on this project is that she
Right.
meant something so deeply to each of us.
And what do you think as our editor? How do you think people, so today's publication date, and we are all curious about how people are going to react to this book. We hope it will somehow touch in every person because there is something for everyone there. But how do you see the book now or in a year or in 5 years?
Well, I've been trolling it online, and I see that it's in the like female history book section on Amazon, and it's currently number 7, which I love to see.
Really?
Yep. And I do think that it's a touchstone. It's a piece of history that she doesn't have a major biography, Justice Ginsburg. That was like a wild commercial success. And I think I see this book almost as filling that gap, especially today, and we're such a visually driven culture, to have these really poignant images driving the stories in this book. I think it's the right kind of history book for this time. I think people can open the book and relate to the images and see like the fuzz coming off of the lace because she's worn it so many times, or like the patina of the clasp of one of the collars wearing off, and seeing themselves and like, oh, I've had a piece of jewelry for 15 years and mine looks like that too. And then you read about her legacy alongside these images, and there's something so human about it, that I hope it will continue to resonate. And we'll see where it is. I'm excited to see it out in the wild.
Me too.
I still never tire of it. And even though my time as an editor I've closed that chapter, I will always be keeping.
After this book, you're like, this is the.
I know. This is my swan song. No, but I'll be keeping my eye on it because I do feel like it's an important publication, and I think I feel really lucky that I got to work on it with you and Sarah, and to put something like this out in the world. That was always my intent as an editor, was to, even if it was frivolous, to put things into the world that really mean something to people. So this definitely checks that box for me.
Thank you, Sarah.
I think.
Were there
Yeah,
any
we're-
questions? Any questions? Yeah, let me bring the microphone to you. It's just because we're recording, when you speak into the microphone, it helps us pick it up.
So I was listening carefully, but would you just reiterate how many of the collars were actual gifts? How many were purchased by her? And then could you specifically show the one that was collaborative and curated? Where is this it? It's not sacrifice, it's
Yes.
family.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is the
Thank
one
you.
that we were talking about.
So that's the question.
Oh yeah, and there are others that were also a commission, but it's a mixture of gift commissions and some that she got.
So
This one is the one that
So
we were
no,
referring to.
Yeah, but how many were her connecting to the artisan versus it being gifted?
I think most of the ones we feature in the book are gifts. Right. And let's see.
And then there are also some other colors that I never got to photograph. So it's not her whole collection. It's the majority of it, I guess, but it's not everything.
And of the 24, 25 that are in here, I think maybe 6 of them, 6 to 10 were commissioned by artists. And some of the ones we didn't speak about, there's one that the Met actually,
The Met Opera.
Met Opera
Right.
actually gifted her. It was a costume piece from their wardrobe department. And so in a way, it was made by an artist. And even though it wasn't specifically commissioned for her, she loved opera. So many operas in the country dimmed their lights when she passed, and they ended up gifting her this jabot that was worn in one of the operas she saw.
And they wrote her name on it and everything, so it was kind of made for her.
Yeah.
She even was a part, she and Justice Scalia were very good friends, were a part, had even some lines of an opera, and then there were extras in some operas, so opera was a big part of her life.
Yeah, and a contemporary composer actually wrote an opera about Ginsburg and Scalia,
Right.
which I still have to find somewhere.
It can be a book by itself.
Right.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I almost hesitate to ask this question, but my curiosity is getting the best of me. I know this isn't exactly what this was about, but in the beginning, you said something about your hysterectomy,
Oh, yeah.
and I
Didn't-
think I heard wrong, but
Yeah,
maybe
no.
I didn't. What was it you said?
No, I just said my previous book, Midlife, is about being a middle-aged woman and the universal themes of it. And as a part of my book, I photographed my own uterus after my hysterectomy.
I did hear it
You
right.
did hear it correct. So when I got the assignment and Catherine Pomeran said, "You're not a still life photographer," I so wanted to get the assignment and to reassure her that I can do it, that this was what I pulled out of my, I don't know where,
Wow.
to say I can photograph still lives. This is what I mean. Nothing to do directly
I
with
know.
the
Thank you for answering that. You are great. That's great.
I will say there is also there's a beautiful photograph of, is it your grandmother or your mother, like cooking and her red nails
Right.
against the
There
table.
are many details. There are
Yeah.
many details that I could think about, but I don't know why I thought about this one. I photographed my grandma Bukhari cooking, and my mother's jewelry, and my grandmother's jewelry. And in the Jewish Museum, actually, there is going to be a show. There are going to be 2 solo shows at the Edwin Howe Gallery and at the Jewish Museum. And in the one in the Jewish Museum, there are personal work pieces of my daughter and a necklace that my mother gave her, and something from my grandmother that I gave my daughter. So there are 3 pieces of jewelry there, and one just like inexpensive key that I bought her that she was wearing. So this will be a part, just the power of jewelry and representation and visuals in the Jewish Museum.
Nice.
Opens on December 15th.
I was going to say, can you please tell us when that
so
opened?
the
So
Edwin
it's
Howe
your
show.
solo show.
So 2 solo shows, one at Edwin Howe Gallery that will open on December 14, opening from 5 to 7. Thank you. And then the Jewish Museum one will go up on December 15th, and there will be an event and a talk later on in March. It will be up for 6 months.
Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
huge.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank
Any other questions? I have a question, and I
Yeah,
don't know
Bella.
that this is something you can necessarily answer, but we speak a lot about Madeleine Albright and, Read My Pins, which was an exhibition that was actually held here at the Museum of Arts and Design. Madeleine Albright had an incredible collection of pins that she used very much in the similar fashion as Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Do you know, did she sort of ever have conversations, with Madeleine Albright? Like, I wonder if, like, I can only imagine what the two of them, like, I have this piece, and when I go to meet with, these representatives or with that president, I wear that, and when I have to, I don't know if it's something.
I wish Sarah Bader were here because she probably has some inkling. I don't know the answer
I
to that.
didn't actually, to be honest, I didn't know about it until after I photographed it. Many people wrote about Madeleine Albright and about this collection, but I don't know that the 2 of them ever had a chance to talk.
I'm just, I don't know, fantasizing about this
I
incredible
know,
conversation.
What a conversation it could have been.
Yeah,
Or
exactly. Or maybe
but
it
we'll never
happened.
know.
Exactly. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bella.
Congratulations on
Thank
the
you.
book.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for being here. That this concludes our day of talks here at the Museum of Arts and Design. Does not conclude New York City Jewelry Week, so I do hope you join us at some other events. Please go buy the book. Please, 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 because I think the best way that we can support your efforts and Ruth Bader Ginsburg's vision is to really support artists and to continue celebrating beauty in a very dark time. So thank you all so very much, and enjoy the rest of the week.
Thank you.